Hello, I'm Org, and this is a review of the Japanese Tier 1 tank, the Renault Otsu. The Otsu design has an interesting history. It began in the French desire for a replacement for the FT light tank. Renault designed the NC1 and 2, which were basically an FT light tank with improved suspension and engine. The NC1 was the fastest French tank at the time built with a top speed of 18.5 km per hour. The French army, however, declined to produce the tank, and Renault instead exported the design to other countries. In 1929, Japan purchased 10 of them, which it called the Otsu-gata. However, the Japanese found the design to be inadequate and sent the French tanks to be rebuilt with more powerful and less flammable engines, much heavier armour, and a more powerful gun. Meanwhile, back in France, Renault updated the NC1 design to the NC31, which you may recognise as the Tier 1 Chinese tank. This was a larger tank to fit a more powerful gun than that on the original FT, and with an even more refined suspension system, increasing the speed further. After a number of redesigns asked for by the French armoured service, this entered production as the Char D1, the Tier 2 French light tank. Back in Japan, the Otsu-gata were assigned to the second independent tank company, and would become the first Japanese tanks to see combat. During the 1932 invasion of Manchuria, the Otsu-gata were attached to the 9th Infantry Division. In this capacity, they played a role in the Shanghai Incident, note the quotes around the word incident, also known as the First Battle of Shanghai, which resulted in the deaths of 14,000 to 24,000 Chinese over a month-long battle. The Otsu were used inside Shanghai itself in order to keep the Chinese troops defending the city engaged, while other forces attacked around the city to cut off Chinese supply lines. This battle and others like it helped shape Japanese armour doctrine in the 1930s. This focused on the use of tanks as infantry support weapons. For this, the Otsu was well suited. The tank was capable of moving with infantry, although it did struggle to keep up with motorised troops. The armour was sufficient to counter any weapons that it was likely to face, with the exception of anti-tank guns, which were not common in the Chinese and Soviet armies, which were the most likely opponents in the early 1930s. The armament of machine guns and the 37mm gun, while not spectacular, was capable against infantry and would provide a significant boost in direct fire capability for the Japanese infantry forces. Unfortunately, I cannot find what happened to the Otsu after the Battle of Shanghai. I get the impression that they were likely replaced by the Type 95 Ha-Go and Type 89 Ko, who were relegated to garrison duties in Manchuria. However, I am not certain of this, and they may have fought in the 1937 invasion of China or possibly even later battles. In World of Tanks, the Otsu plays almost like a Tier 1 heavy tank. Its greatest asset is its armour. The Otsu has 30mm thick armour on the front and sides of the hull, and 20mm on the turret and 22mm of the hull. This armour can be very effective, as most Tier 1 tanks have penetrations around 30 or 40mm, and Tier 2 tanks are not that much better. And the Otsu's hull is very angular, while the turret is actually slightly curved, which means that tanks can have trouble penetrating the turret or the hull of this. The Otsu does however have weak spots. The turret is weaker and while curved will present flat or almost flat surfaces. If the Otsu's gun is pointing directly at you, the cupola is large enough target and easier to penetrate than the mantlet or the curved turret sides. On the front of the hull there is also a driver's access hatch, which is only 15mm thick. At a distance it is very angled, but as you get closer to the Otsu you begin to shoot down at the hatch, reducing the effective thickness of the armour. In terms of mobility, the Otsu is bad. The top speed of 23 km per hour is average for the tier. However, even with a top engine, the Otsu has a very low power to weight ratio and high terrain resistance. This gives the Otsu poor acceleration and hill climbing ability. The traverse speed is also a bit on the low side, but for this tier it's not significantly so. Where the Otsu really struggles is in the gun. The top gun only has 0.5 accuracy and a 2.7 second aim time. In practice the aim time is much longer as the tank does not have a gunner. After the tank stops moving, there is a delay before the tank starts to aim, which simulates the commander shifting from the cupola viewport to the gun sight. On top of this deficiency, the shells fired have a low velocity compared to other Tier 1 tanks, making hitting moving targets very difficult. The gun also has low penetration and a fairly low rate of fire. The only good things about this gun is that it averages 45 hit points damage per shot, which is pretty good for Tier 1. And it also has really good gun depression and elevation, so hills are your friend basically. The question then is how to use the Otsu in game. I found success in using this tank aggressively. The armour is sufficient that you will bounce a number of shots fired at you, and the gun requires that you have to get close to the enemy to use it. The only limitation with being truly aggressive is that it is unwise to fire on the move. Even sitting still, I only hit 6 shots out of 10 at medium ranges. It is only at point blank ranges that you can fire on the move with any reliability. Angling the armour is also a good habit to get in. I've even had success with side scraping this tank around corners. This playstyle helped me to get a 55.5 win rate over 81 battles with an average of 1.14 kills per battle and 160 average damage. Admittedly, this was basically seal clubbing, but the armour on this tank can still prove a lifesaver for new players learning this game. My armour efficiency in this tank was 0.65, which is not the best, but it is better than for any non-heavy tank I've played. Well, that is the Renault Otsu, a tank with an interesting history which I'm sure will give many new players some experience with heavy gameplay. We joined this battle just after I've killed my first heavy tank, a medium one. I'm taking shots at this LOL tractor. I suppose I'm getting some success here. Actually, we'll set him on fire, that's quite a bit of success. That was actually surprisingly good accuracy for the Otsu. I was about to say I don't have shots on that guy, but suddenly I do. Watch this T1, I think I got one shot through my cupola. And because I'm stationary, I can actually shoot it fairly accurately. Took out the wall there. And again, I think I got a couple of shots through my cupola, but the rest of them, most of the shots that T1 fired just bounced, doing no damage or slightly damaging my tracks and my turret ring. So now I am flanking. Don't worry, we'll get there eventually. Though too slow, but it's not actually that slow for this tier. It's just, it just takes a while to get up speed. Here comes an MS1. Nice easy kill, it was already pretty heavily damaged. There's another one. Actually, that's an Otsu, but another enemy tank I meant. No shot. And I went on to get a, killed an AFK tank in the enemy base to get my top gun, but I don't think it really counts when you killed an AFK enemy. So this game, well, I suppose it's probably a bit more like the Battle of Shanghai, isn't it? Urban map. And having heavy armor, I'm just kind of going to go straight for it. So me and this other Otsus, we spot a T1, miss because it was moving, and particularly accurate, stop, aim a little bit, get a kill. We also saw that the Otsu can have an autocannon, but I never actually really tried it. I kind of took one look at it and went, oh, I'm not happy with the penetration for that, and I kind of prefer to have a gun that can pretty much kill all my enemies. Well, at least have a chance of killing all my enemies. So now I'm just going to push up this line here. Trying to zigzag a bit just so if anyone does pop around that corner, my arm is not flat to them. but there doesn't seem to be anybody here. So let's go to flank and get flanking fire onto these tanks here. Another one's popped up, and I'm just going to keep going. My team haven't really bothered following me up, but I'm sure I know they're coming now. The medium tank hasn't seen me. So look at that aiming time, and you saw the time after I stopped that it took for it to, the reticle to begin moving in. Didn't aim that time, but it was at very close range. Tractor seems to be AFK. I'm not particularly patient with this gun. Managed to hit the car, hit the tank. And it suddenly wakes up, which makes me suspect it's a bot. But I got a kill there. T1 gets tracked. I don't manage to quite get the kill on it. But, well, this is effectively the end of the game. The MS1 left just goes in caps. And we are left to, well, I don't do anything but drive around. This is the last game I want to show you. And it's not a particularly good game, but it's a special game, and you'll see why. I was kind of blessed in this game, for want of a better word, that kind of everyone else on both teams sucked. So what I was doing, what I was thinking here was I'd work up through the town, around to the right of the hill, but see pretty soon, it looks to me like we're actually already going to have a couple of tanks heading that direction. So instead I go and decide I'm going to try and take the hill. The Otsu's not really a great tank for that, since it's slow, particularly going uphill. But I don't think there are any tier 1 tanks that are actually particular. Oh, I suppose the T1 Cunningham would be the one. If you have that, you're basically going to go for the hill, but all the others are pretty much the same really in terms of speed and hill climbing ability. I see the MS1 looks to be heading around the right hand side of the rocks, so I aim towards the left hand side. Figure we can try and pincer this guy. But there's another tank behind it. Fortunately I get lucky there and track it in such a way that it can't shoot back at me. So goodbye T1 Cunningham. Next time for this pincer move. And it's not looking at me. Still doesn't seem to notice me. Nope. There's another kill and my teammate almost manages to hit me. But the right flank, where I was originally intending to go, has basically collapsed, so I'm heading up on the hill to lend some fire support. And this is something that Otsu's really great at, just because it's got such good gun depression, that I can essentially shoot over the edge of this hill without exposing very much of my tank at all. As you'll see in a minute or so once I slowly drive over there. There are the two medium tanks. So let's poke over the edge a tiny bit. One shot. Two shots. Medium tanks are actually pretty good to shoot high explosive at in this thing, because Reichi shells actually have enough penetration to go straight through the armor, you know, almost all the time. And that medium tank was actually reversing to try and get the elevation to shoot me, but I could easily shoot down on it. Have a light tractor. It's moving slow, so I can actually hit it with some accuracy here. some accuracy. I missed that shot. Managed to get a pretty solid hit there. That one falls a bit short and behind. And it's behind a rock now. Let's see if I can poke over and grab this guy. Oh, yes, but not quite. Okay. Got him in the end and did a little bit of damage to myself. Just got to wait for my tracks to get back up and I can chase down the guy in the cap. Just got to try and spot this guy. He's pretty close to death. I think he's probably behind the wall, but well. And for some reason his turret's pointing in the opposite direction. So there you go. Let's just edit out a bit of driving, because it turns out the last enemy tank is sitting AFK in my base, and not my base, the enemy's base, but for some reason my team don't really want to go engage it. So I just pop up, take the shots, and I managed to kill every tank on the enemy team. So that was a special game, and this is a fairly special tank.